Or good morning, parent, or good evening. It is nighttime. Good evening, parents. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to give everyone a few more moments to get logged on, and then we will get started here shortly. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday evening Parent Academy webinar session. Thank you for joining, and again, we are excited to have you as audience listeners and participants. I am Dr. Dre Graham, the Director of Educational Equity and Outreach for Alachua County Public Schools, and I welcome you to this evening. Tonight, we will receive some helpful information from guest speaker Dr. Carol Lewis, who will share information on 6 steps to emotional health and other well-being basics for our ACPS students and families. Just before we get started, let's review a few housekeeping elements. Please keep your microphones on mute through the duration of the presentation. We will be monitoring your questions and will respond accordingly. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your webinar window. And please note that all Parent Academy webinars are closed captioned, recorded, and posted to our website for access at a later date, and for re-review, and for any individuals who cannot tune in live tonight. Your questions will be answered at the conclusion of each session. If there's a specific need to have a personal conversation, the Parent Academy email is parentacademy@gm.sbac.edu. And we will get those questions or your requests for additional information forwarded to the correct ACPS or community team member. And now, I would like to present our guest speaker for this evening, Dr. Carol Lewis.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Carol Lewis. I am a clinical psychologist with 37 years of clinical experience and a faculty member at University of Florida Department of Psychiatry. I also have a master's in public health. For 20 years before my current position, I worked in the outpatient department of what was called then Shands Vista Psychiatric Hospital. I do a lot of trauma work. I also work on the University of Florida's mobile outreach clinic, which sometimes we call bus-based free primary care, and it's also free behavioral health care a couple of times a month when I'm there. So let me see if I can pull up my PowerPoint. I'm here to give some information to maybe contextualize mental health, behavioral health, and hopefully provide a context that will be helpful and healing for everyone here. You are welcome to put questions in the Q&A box, and we may answer them or address them as we go along the way, or perhaps wait until the end. Part of my mission here is as a treatment provider who works with people often after they've had a lot of suffering, sometimes for quite a long time. My hope is to provide information and context so that we can have as much well-being as possible and learn tools and skills to give out to others around us. And in fact, right now with the University of Florida Mobile Outreach Clinic, where we're doing a project called Community Wellbeing Mentor Training, where we're training just a hour-and-a-half training to community members or agency members in some of these basic tools and skills, which then we ask them to go out and share, translate for their community and share. But let's talk about this. We are going to talk about the 6 steps to emotional health, but let's think of this in a broader context of well-being. And this would be applicable to you as parents, to your teens and children, Although I am primarily in a clinical setting working with adults at this time, I had one of my areas of special training was working with children, teens, and families, and I did that as part of my work for about 25 years. All right, okay, let's see here. Here we go. All right, and so I put up this graphic from NAMI, which is a wonderful organization, National Alliance for Mental Illness or of Mental Illness. Not to scare anybody, but I'm really just providing some context that I'm sure we all know that there are immense mental health needs and suffering and misery and distress, particularly anxiety and depression across the world, certainly, and within adults, but teenagers as well. And actually the numbers and the statistics for teens are increasing. And so we know that the person by person treatment is insufficient. How we're doing it now is not really addressing all of the needs that are there. Let's talk about what we can do about that. So I love this quote, and it's applicable to all of us. You cannot give what you do not have. So I will offer this for those of you who are educators, for those of you who are parents, perhaps you're both of those things. So if we don't pay attention and use ourselves up such that our cup is really empty, we don't have things to offer other people, including our children. So I'm really encouraging everyone to pay attention to how you're doing and take good care, use good self-care for yourself, and apply the things we're going to talk about tonight to you as well. All right. So if we look at the idea of resilience, it is this idea of being able to bounce back, to weather both easy and more difficult circumstances, perhaps to recover quickly. It's not necessarily the idea of having no issues or problems, but like a palm tree, being strong and stable, but able to bend but not break. Not like an oak tree or a pine tree that with sufficient wind might snap and break. We want to be that palm tree and have resilience and thrive and have joy as well. So there's a lot of science. There's a whole resilience science that's been around for more than 50 years that has a lot to teach us about what it is that we need to be resilient and have well-being. So this is a very busy slide here, very, very busy. And I'm not really going to tell you all the things on here other than this is one person, one set of researchers' ideas about what we need as individuals to be resilient. And the main point, or the main reason I'm showing this to you, is because on the individual person level, we can benefit and have more resilience from resources outside of ourselves. And so every resilience model has a secure base. And so that would most often be a secure relationship with a parent, but it could be with a teacher or an educator. Education is here, friendships are here. These are things outside of ourselves. So those things support us. Those are supports. But there are also these internal resilience skills. And so these might be coping skills. We're going to talk about some of those. Focused breathing, mindfulness is one of them. And I'll tell you what one way to think about that and why we're talking about it here. But we really need both. Supports from outside of ourselves and also internal resources or internal skills. Sometimes people will think this is the only thing we need, and it's a resource from outside of ourselves, but yet that's only part of the story. I will also say we can be resilient, more or less resilient on the individual level, the family level, the school level, the community level, the city level, etc. They talk about resilient cities. So for Florida, it might be cities that have infrastructure such that if a hurricane comes, we're prepared for that. But here we're talking about individual resilience. Let me also say that in resilience, people talk about beating the odds while changing the odds. And so the beating the odds is these skills and tools and resources, and changing the odds is that work around us to have there be more equity and fairness, etc. So this is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And again, there's a whole science around resilience, but this, I think, is a great summary of some of the most commonly found individual resilience factors. And so there's that secure base, so the stable and supportive relationship over time. This sense of self-efficacy, which is really seeing a connection between our efforts and the outcome. When that doesn't happen, probably some of you have heard of this idea of learned helplessness, which is I do all these things and there's no impact or nothing seems to change. So very important to see our efforts resulting in something, hopefully something good. Then there are these adaptive skills. This says self-regulatory capacity. These are coping skills, really, how to manage ourselves on the internal way. And then sources of faith, hope, and cultural traditions, which can really ground us and provide us with stability in its own right, or their own rights. All right. So before we do this, let's practice a little skill, and we'll circle back around to this. So I'm going to invite everyone, whoever's listening, whenever they are listening, to take a couple of slow, deep, rhythmic breaths with me. We're going to breathe in. We're going to breathe in calm. Breathe out tension. Exhale longer than the inhale, breathing in calm. Breathing out tension. If the exhales are a little bit longer than the inhales, it will stimulate the soothing part of the nervous system. So we just did a little focused breathing. And anytime someone is feeling anxious or has a challenge in front of them, it's a good thing to do. All people are anxious at some times, some of us more than others. And to be able to be aware of and use a skill like that can be very important. So here, let's talk for a moment about how do we know how we feel. So in mental health, we're often confusing in our languaging or unclear. And so if I talk about how I feel, is it a sensation in the body? Is it a thought? Is it an emotion? Or perhaps it's a behavior, but the part of the problem with fuzzy language is it really then makes it difficult to know what to do about how I feel, or to begin to address it so that I feel better. So when people come to my office or other places where I practice, they may fill out a screener for depression and anxiety. Here, it's this PHQ-GAD. There are some various versions of it. It's open source, used around the world. The one that we use in our clinic is 16 items, again, used around the world. And 9 of them are assessing depression, 7 of them are assessing anxiety. The items are pretty directly related to diagnoses of depression and anxiety. So you might think, if we're looking at how we know how we feel, those 16 items are all about emotion. Here it is. But actually only 3 of them directly reference mood. The other 13 are about thoughts, body sensations or body functions, and behavior. So how we know how we feel, the emotions is like a cloud, very nebulous. It's really thoughts, body sensations, and behavior. And at any given moment, let's say this moment, we all have habits in each of these areas. So that's going to be what's most likely to show up, all other things being equal. You see these arrows, each of these areas is related to the other. So I might begin having a thought, oh no, I'm giving a webinar tonight. Oh my goodness. And my body might start to respond. I don't know what kind of behavior. I would arrive early. That's what I did. But it may start up here, or I might notice a sensation in the body. That's sometimes what happens with panic. And then have a, oh my gosh, kind of thought, and have behavior, and then interpret it as an emotion. So the good news is that we can enter into any of these to begin to make change, with the emotions being the fuzziest of them all. If that's where we're aiming, it's going to be really hard to get our feet on the ground and make a change. So let's think of this oval of the body sensations here. And so here is a concept or an idea called the zone of well-being. And this, again, is in the body and in the nervous system. So let's just imagine that we're in our zones of well-being. We notice when we're getting worked up or activated in the body. We can imagine what that might be: heart pounding and racing, or breathing more rapid, or whatever it is. And we have tools and skills to keep ourselves in here. Evasive maneuvers, so to speak. We notice when we're getting droopy, and once again have tools and skills to keep ourselves in here. This upper activation area is high arousal. And for those of you who've heard of the fight or flight response, or actually if you haven't, I'll tell you about it now. This is a survival response our bodies are already equipped with, and it's to help us survive, so that if a bear's running down the hall, I know we're all in different places, but if a bear were running down the hall, we wouldn't have to have a conversation. Oh my goodness, Dr. Graham, what should we do? I don't know. Instead, our bodies just start to respond right away to help us survive, to fight or run or freeze. And so all of the things that happen then are in the service of survival. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the heart might pound and race. We might breathe more rapidly. That is to get the oxygen in and pump it to the arms and the legs for the fighting or the running. We may sweat to cool the body for the fighting or the running. Digestion, metabolism is pulled away from digestion because we don't need to digest if we're fighting or running. There is this freeze response, which is also if we think of it in the other animal kingdom, sort of playing dead, or like, I'm not here, you don't need to bother with me. So here we are in our zone of well-being. Oops. Now I see that this does work. So hang on one moment. All right. And now here's life happening. So a trigger occurs here. It could be something outside of ourselves, like someone saying something to us. It could be the traffic on the way home. It could be an interaction, parent-child. It could be trying to help you with your homework, or did you fill out that application? It could be our own thoughts or something inside ourselves, and other things. But a trigger happens, and then our nervous system responds. And so we may get thrown into this high zone, high activation zone, where we may experience it as, or interpret it as, irritability or anger or anxiety. We may get thrown into this low zone, where we may experience it as sadness or depression. We may feel fatigue. We may isolate. All people get thrown out of their zone of well-being sometimes, but it's a problem if it happens too easily, too frequently. We go too high or too low, or perhaps go too high or too low and get stuck there. So learning what's happening in the body, super important information for us. And we'll talk about the regulation of that. So let's also imagine with this concept that how important it is to know what calm feels like in the body and what calm feels like in the mind. And many, many people are not aware of that because we're just very busy doing whatever we're doing. And to begin to kind of have that awareness of calm in body and mind, and have it be perhaps even a target, that we're going to aim for that. We know where we are, heart is pounding or clenching my jaw, whatever it may be. And I've got some tools to help me come back into this place. If so, when we think about anxiety, for the most part, it is living up here in this high activation. And so everybody visits this place, but we don't want to live there. And when we are in this place, in this fight or flight, it is a survival response of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, to keep us safe. And so it should be like a fire alarm. It should not go off very often or last very long. And so instead, if we're living up here, a lot of the times, really our experience is a reflection of the fact that we have stress hormones circulating in our bodies more of the time, perhaps, than would be healthy for us. And we do know that if we have those stress hormones in our systems a lot of the time, there are implications for that. I usually call it the stress tax. So there are impacts on all of our systems that make us more likely across our lives to have conditions like cancer and diabetes, inflammatory sort of conditions. So just remember, even though this is an experience, it's a reflection of something real happening in the body. This also can come from other sorts of conditions, and many people just don't even know they're living up here. We might be living way up here, and we might regulate ourselves to right here. If you can see my cursor, where I'm above the line, but I'm better. And that's sometimes called a false window, where it's better, but we still are having those stress hormones circulating in the body too much of the time. We need them if there's a physical emergency happening right now. So if there's a car wreck right in front of me or something like that that requires a physical response, because remember, the heart pounding and digestion impacts, and all of our senses change a little bit, preparing us to manage whatever the physical emergency is. And if you're not having a physical emergency, but you're having these symptoms and in this high range, we want you to notice and to be doing some things to help turn the volume of those responses down. And so I'm showing you this just to let you know, and I know it's very small, but I'll tell you what this is. So this is a resilience plan, and I can certainly provide these to Dr. Graham and the school board if there's a way to send them out to people who might be interested. But remember those 4 areas of how do I know how I feel? Here they are on the left-hand side, and it says what are the early warning signs of difficulty, which could be anxiety or depression, however you want to think about it, or anger, let's say. But in the body, in the thinking, in our behavior, and in our emotions. And I'm just giving you a heads up, the emotions, remember, it's the fuzziest. But the action is on the right-hand side here, where we figure out healthy actions to take to address whatever these warning signs are. In each of these areas, in the emotions, it's really going to be an action we take in the body, in our thinking, and in our behavior. And these are skills. So these are things we can learn and get better at. With regard to depression and anxiety, since earlier we were talking about the increase in mental health issues in teenagers and the unmet mental health needs in our communities. Let's look at some of the most important targets if we're going to try to address depression and anxiety. So first, let's look at this little graphic. And so the one character on the left says, what is that? And the other one says, oh, it's just my mind. So our minds are busy because they're built to help us survive. And we're never going to get to 100% clear mind all the time, but we can learn how to manage our thoughts and what goes on in our mind more effectively. So 2 of the most important targets for addressing depression and anxiety are healthy lifestyle habits, which we will come to. And this says reducing ruminating thought. And that is that round and round anxious thought or distressed thought of some kind or sad thought. we can learn how to be aware and manage and work with our thoughts in a healthier way without being hijacked by them. The other item on the slide for depression says having meaningful and purposeful activities, and that's in the eye of the beholder. And so here we're to our 6 steps to emotional health for teens. There's only a couple of different adjustments for teens and then adults. And so number 1 for mental health for all people is sleep. So you might think, well, gosh, you know, that the psychologist should be here to talk about the topics we get distressed about, school and homework and friends. But often, really, the crux of the matter is not the content or the issues, but the process. How do we address those issues? And so we can address them in a healthier fashion if we are healthy in our body and mind. And that's not even discussing the direct impacts, for instance, of sleep deprivation over time, if we're talking about number 1. But so for adults, we recommend 7 to 9 hours of sleep most nights. So 7 to 9. For teens, and perhaps it gets a little more even younger, but for teens, it's 8 to 10 hours a night. And some people will say, I don't need that, and this and that. When we're younger, we can get away with it a little bit more, but we still need what we need. The sleep experts are very clear on that. And so these 2 bullet points are very important with regard to sleep. Number 1 is that we really recommend people be off all electronics at least 30 minutes before they go to bed. And probably you're all parents, and so you may be laughing, haha. Anywhere I talk about these sorts of things, this is really a sticking point for people. It doesn't matter their age or educational level. People are on their devices often right until they go to sleep. And so some of you may have heard that that there's a problem with the blue light spectrum that comes from our devices. It doesn't necessarily look blue. And so what we know about that is that the blue light suppresses our own melatonin. And so our bodies, some people take melatonin, they get it at the pharmacy over the counter or something like that, gets prescribed for us or recommended by our doctors. But we produce our own melatonin. And it is one of our chemicals that helps us, self-produced, helps us fall asleep. It's not the stay asleep kind of chemical, it's the fall asleep. So we are suppressing our own melatonin if we're on electronics right up until we try to go to sleep. Also, there's stimulation from the lights and sounds and the content, right? We're thinking about whatever it is. So we recommend that people engage in some kind of transition activity before they rest. And so we're not going to run through the day and dive into bed and be able to sleep well. We really need to kind of set the stage for that. So let's say we're off electronics. Then you might read an actual paper book, not work related or self-help, I would say, right before bed. You're going to read for a little bit. A magazine would be fine. If someone's not a reader, they might listen to music, but perhaps not on an e-reader. And I've had conversations with a lot of people about their particular e-reader, but almost all of the e-readers pulsate a little bit and send off some light. So if you could get a paper book, that would be fabulous. Number 2 of the 6 steps to emotional health, and this says again teens at the top, but except for the sleep and the amount of sleep and the amount of exercise, same exact guidelines for adults as well. So number 2 is eating. So we are recommending for people to eat at least 3 times a day something with nutritional value. So as parents, and I've got 3 adult children, I know that when our kids are tweens and teens, their appetite's changing and they're growing and all of these sorts of things. And many teens don't have much of an appetite in the morning. But we know that we're healthiest if we can eat 3 times a day. And probably most importantly, not go long periods without eating. So if your teen isn't hungry in the morning and, will take a granola bar or something and eat it a little bit later, that's a good thing. If they are distressed or experiencing stress, anxiety, depression, I would try to firm these up. And so what might have been manageable in some other time under stress, we want to try to make a little more structure then. I'll also say that when people are experiencing depression and anxiety, all of those rhythms in the body and mind can be disrupted. And so some people who are depressed oversleep, some undersleep, some overeat, or appetite goes up, some appetite goes down. And even within one person, it can waver back and forth. Those are times, or under stress, or if we know stressors are coming, when we want to not just flow with what we feel like doing, but put a little structure in there. All right. Number 3 is exercise, or someone recently suggested to me, and I love this, that we call it movement instead. And so exercise seems like something most people don't want to do. Sometimes we'll call it physical activity because we are moving around, but even movement. And so we suggest that people aim for about 20 minutes of movement. Here it says 20 to 30. That for teens, if they could get a little bit more than the adults, and many of them are. We get a little more sedentary as we age. But exercise is prescribed by itself as a treatment for depression. So exercise and some of the functions it has in our bodies and nervous systems, exercise is mood regulating and anxiety reducing. So it is a great sort of habit to have in place. And remember, let's call it movement and make it whatever works for us. So this can even be done in smaller chunks. So we might move around 10 minutes twice a day. I work also with a number of people who have chronic health conditions or chronic pain, and they may move around as they're able in their house, even 10 minutes twice a day. That's terrific. That's terrific. This is for mood regulation. We're not training for a marathon on these habits here. Number 4 is daily pleasant activities. The science is very clear on the benefits of doing something pleasant every single day and paying attention to it. So it doesn't have to cost anything. You don't have to go anywhere special for it. It doesn't have to take a long time. It doesn't have to be a trip or vacation or going to Disney World. We really want to start with punctuating our time with pleasant things on the day-to-day basis. When we have distress, we can get, I'll give you this psychology silver dollar word, anhedonia. So it's a brain thing. And so it's a loss of interest or pleasure in things that were previously interesting or pleasant, or the inability to experience that pleasure. And so that is a symptom of depression. And so when things are not, as things spiral down, it could even be very slow, we may find that things that were pleasant before don't feel pleasant, so we're going to drop them. We have enriching activities and depleting ones. The depleting ones are often the ones we have to do, homework, managing homework as a parent. And so we often keep the depleting things, but as the enriching things, if we are having some difficulty, as the enriching things no longer feel that good, we start dropping them. We may also isolate from others because that also is not feeling so good. And so then we can get ourselves to this place where there really doesn't seem to be anything that's joyful around. And so, yes, then we can start to do daily pleasant activities. But if we could do this already, and it's good for all of us to do something pleasant every single day and pay attention to it. Now, if I decide, well, my pleasant activity is going to be to work in my yard, and I go out to do it, and I've got this round and round negative thought, let's say, or worry thought, I'm still going to benefit from being out there in my yard, but I will not get as much benefit as if I was trying to bring my attention and awareness to what I'm doing, even on the level of noticing the dirt or the plants or whatever it is. So keep it simple, but know that doing something pleasant every single day and paying attention to it is powerful. And again, the science supports it. This is something I know sometimes we hear for our children when we start to notice changes, they're not seeing their friends or not doing their activities. This is something to pay attention to. And if that were happening for our children or ourselves, we wouldn't want to wait until we feel like doing those pleasant activities. We'd want to go ahead and put them in place and hopefully keep them going over time. And we'll talk a little bit more about these, but number 5 on our 6 steps is focused breathing or slow, deep, rhythmic breathing. If the exhales are a little bit longer than the inhales, it does stimulate that soothing part of the nervous system. So for all of us that are having anxiety of the everyday kind, or perhaps something that's a little more significant or severe, it's really important to be doing these sorts of things to calm the body and mind. And so, as we did before, it can start with breathing in calm, breathing out tension, exhale longer than the inhale. There's a number of different, many different ways to do focused breathing practices. For teenagers, I often find, our kids and a lot of adults, including myself, one of my favorite focused breathing practices is to breathe to music. And so we're not going to try to breathe on the beat. So you can have your child, or if you're doing this yourself, pick a song you like. It doesn't really matter what it is. And then we're going to breathe slow, deep, and rhythmically from the beginning to the end of the song. And you might imagine breathing in calm and breathing out tension. If we use the same song over time, our bodies will start to have a relaxation response when they hear the song, even before we start any kind of focused breathing. And this mindful thinking is about managing our thoughts. Remember, we talked about that earlier as being an important strategy to manage mood and anxiety. So learning to notice thoughts, and just because we have a thought doesn't make it true or real or the time to think about it. These are things I work with in my clinical practice all the time. These 4 simple steps, are we learn and we get better at this. These are skills to notice our thoughts and then imagine letting them go. So our thoughts, let's imagine they're like clouds in the sky, arising in the mind, drifting through, disappearing from view if we don't grab them and grow them or develop them further. So I think that can be a very useful way to think about our thoughts. And remember those 4 areas of awareness. We have habits of thought. So what are going to be the thoughts that are most likely to come up? Well, the ones we've spent a lot of time with. We're kind of leaning into those habits, all other things being equal. So to work on adjusting that takes some effort, but very, very doable. And this says find a different focus. It could be, let's say we're noticing thoughts. I'm going to invite you to bring awareness to the breath at the nose. We can notice it elsewhere in the body, the chest, the abdomen, the whole body, but just let's take a breath and notice the breath at the nose. So breathing in, breathing out, unless it's 100 degrees outside, which actually it has been quite a bit in terms of the feels like temperature. But our bodies are 97 or 98, or if we're younger, I guess a little bit warmer. So lots of time, the air coming into our bodies is cooler than our body temperature, and our body warms it up. And so we might really be able to notice it at the nose. And that is just what I'll call a grounding technique, which we'll look at more of. Tools and skills. Here's some of those focused breathing practices. We've already practiced breathing in calm and breathing out tension. You can count your breaths. There are many, many possibilities. You count them because that gives you a focus and helps you keep your mind on track a little bit. But if you're counting, let's say up to 5, inhale 1, exhale 1. If you lose track, you just reset. I like that. Breathing to music, and you can use words, but many, many different practices. And a lot of people have something that they like in particular. Then we have grounding practices. The breath, the senses, and grounding are some of our most powerful tools. So one way to do this, and this is sort of, here's my mind going round and round. I'm going to bring awareness on purpose to, often it's something concrete. And so I'll invite you, number 1, to notice your feet on the floor or wherever they're resting or in space. We're not doing rocket science. We're just trying to have awareness and manage what's going on in our mind. Now I invite you, number 2, to bring awareness to the surfaces supporting the body, sensations of sitting or of walking, whatever it may be. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. We're using our senses. Let me see if I've got that on the next page. Yeah, and so here, and it doesn't matter what order you do these in, but you're very, very powerful. You're going to use those main 5 senses we usually hear about to bring awareness from our round and round thought to this present moment. And so here it says we're noticing, you can notice or describe 5 things you see, 4 things you feel, and this could be the air or touching one hand with another or the desk or the pencil, whatever it is. 3 things you hear, could include silence. 2 things you smell or hear, 2 smells you like, because you might not be able to identify 2. And then 1 thing you taste. I often, when I'm doing this practice with someone, forget one of the senses. And so then you can just come to name 1 good thing about yourself if you've forgotten one. And I think in terms of the grounding practices, so I want to show you 1 more piece in the palm of my hand. And so I love this. This is developed by a social worker. And so again, we have a hand with us. Most of us do at all times. And so here, this skill, grounding and bringing us to the present moment, we're going to think of in terms of a resource, a positive memory, perhaps a place that feels calm or safe, or a character or a person that's supportive of us. And so you see here, it says at the bottom, the goal is to carry a positive memory in the palm of my hand and remember it with all 5 senses to make it feel more real. So I'm going to think of this place in the mountains where I go every year. What touch is there? Well, the cool breeze. I might, the sensation of walking, I'll use that as a touch as well, because I have to walk up to this certain spot. What might I taste? Well, there I might taste something that's a little minty, and perhaps I'm not really tasting that there, but people often at the beach will taste the salt spray. What do I smell? What do I hear? What do I see? And so we think about it. You can even print this out and write on it. But then some other time, you might touch your hand, one hand with the other hand, and I'm thinking of that place in the mountains, what I see, what I hear. And as I'm not in my round and round ruminating thought, I'm settling a little bit more, body and mind. Remember, trying to notice where calm is and help myself be in that place. So peace in the palm of my hand. And I'll just say just a few words about mindfulness. We hear this sort of thing, or mindful thinking. Really what this is learning how to relate to our thoughts with some perspective. And so our little graphic here, this person's lost in thought. And many people who come to see me say, I just can't manage or control my thoughts. The task is not to control our thoughts. I really would say that's an illusion. It's to manage and work with them, because we have those great survival responses, to keep us safe. We're equipped to look for threat around us, even if we don't know we're doing it. And so, So here as we develop the skills we've been talking about, we can notice thoughts. Here's a thought about a test tomorrow without then being hijacked or swept away by it. And so even with mood and anxiety, people often will think or even say that I'm battling depression or I'm struggling with anxiety. And so what we resist persists. So instead, perhaps we're going to think about managing those sorts of things rather than controlling them. And I'll say there are formal and informal mindfulness practices. So some people talk about meditation. I mean, that's fine if that's what someone wants. There's mindful movement that helps us learn to be more present moment, like martial arts isn't on here, but that would certainly fit, or yoga, Tai Chi. But basically, we can do anything more mindful or less mindful. We can be mindless, doing anything. I love mindful eating. And so that's a way to really savor our food even more. And we've talked about mindful breathing. I think really this is the last thing that I'll share. So really the question comes up quite often, how much should I think about things? I'm being hijacked or swept away by these thoughts. And so here's a dimension. And the things we're asking this question about might be problems, issues, stressors, traumas. I deal with people with a lot of trauma quite often and work with them. And so how much should we think about something? On the one hand here, we're giving our answer as never because it's so unpleasant. That's repression or denial. Probably most of us know that's not going to be a sustainable answer. It's like we've thrown a boomerang out and it's going to come back. It is the right answer right after a crisis often, or right after a loss. We're doing all of these things. But then over time, we need to turn toward whatever it is. The flip side over here is thinking about whatever it is so much of the time that we feel like we're drowning in it, really. So also it's not effective over time. We're often where this middle star is, where we're at school or work and we're allowing ourselves to focus on that. But when we walk out, there it is. And this green star is really our sweet spot where we're going to and this is a skill, we can get better at it. We're going to learn how to think about things in a way that has a beginning and an end on any given occasion. And I would put some guidelines around this. So we don't want to 30 minutes or less. It could be 2 minutes or no minutes if we've thought about it a lot. Certain times are not the right time. Right before bed, think of your kids, think of ourselves. When we're hangry, there's certain times, again, that are not the right time for this. And we might set aside a time that I'm going to think about issues and problems or talk about them at home, not at the dinner table, not right before bed, but at some other time with a beginning and an end. And then we put it in the box on the shelf. Let's imagine, figuratively, we get better at that. Remember how we were going to read before bed as a transition and clear the worries and concerns of the day out of our mind or out of our brain. Here also, we've thought about something or we've talked about it, and now we're going to put it in this box on the shelf, but we just talked about it. So it's going to come up in our mind, right? That makes sense. So then we can take a breath and say, that's not for right now, and come back to present moment. Also, right after I spend that focus time thinking about it or talking about it, that transition activity could be something where I can notice if I'm still thinking about it or not. So I might play a game on my phone or work on a jigsaw puzzle or listen to music. So those are some strategies and tools for all human beings to help us be our healthiest, best selves. And I really enjoyed and appreciated being here with all of you. It was my pleasure.
All right, and Dr. Lewis, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
Make sure everyone is back together. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight and sharing just those absolutely incredible techniques in order to help us to not only learn how to better self-regulate, but also to be able to support and advocate for our students. So just wanted to thank you once again for being here. And I wanted to open up, we have about 11 minutes left, open up the Q&A for an opportunity to ask Dr. Lewis some questions. We have one comment, how can I get this recording? Well, we actually put these recordings on the Parent Academy website. So if you go to the sbac.edu website and you click on Equity and Outreach, from there, you'll also have the opportunity to go to our Parent Academy and you'll find the archive of all of our Thursday webinars. We are here every week at 6, and we keep a recording of all of those so that you can access them again at a later date. So thank you for that question, KP. Do we have any other questions? Give it a little bit of wait time. Being a teacher, we get used to this.
Well, this is a busy time, I know, for families. But I hope you'll think about these tools and skills. The science supports these things. And do something little. The breath, the 5 senses, grounding, those things are really our most powerful tools. And we all carry what we need to use them with us at all times.
And Dr. Lish, you say do something little, and it's just amazing how one little thing can make a very large impact. So once again, we thank you for those tools. And not seeing any more questions, we'll go ahead and close out for the evening. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us in tonight's Zoom. We appreciate your participation each week, that you are available to connect with us for more informative presentations and discussions. Once again, I'm Dr. Dre Graham, Director of Educational Equity and Outreach for Alachua County Public Schools. Next week, we look forward to seeing you back on Thursday, August 31st, where we'll be joined by Mr. Chris Dodike, who will provide information on parent access and assistance for our Canvas learning management platform. We hope you'll all join us again. Have a great evening.